Hello, everyone. We have an awful lot of reading connected to this week's threaded discussion. I wanted to give you this PowerPoint so you have everything in one nice place, but also do this walkthrough so that you can help frame it through the lens of assessment and how you would use this information to inform the kinds of assessments you could, would, should, maybe will, maybe won't be designing for your students. So, Bananarama, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. I mean that very seriously when we're looking at multiple forms of assessment. Formal versus informal, portfolios, synchronous versus async, formative versus summative, authentic, and collaborative assessments and peer assessments. Now, again, you do need to go through all these resources, but I want to give you some real context before you jump in. So the formal versus informal, we're actually using the Blended Learning Toolkit that we looked at in week 2. It's absolutely brilliant resource. I actually return to it quite often. Specifically looking at formal assessments as a way to provide systematic measurements of students' projects, and informal. Well, in informal, in blended, in fully online, what does that actually mean? Generally provide the faculty member the ability to get. How do we do that in fully online? I can tell you that what many of us do is we use the threaded discussions. This is why we require ongoing participation, not just one post. We don't use them, hey, just answer my question. We, as instructors, are watching your involvement, your engagement in the discussion as a form of informal assessment. Now, yes, you do get a grade at the end of the week, but the grade is kind of a culminating grade for the whole of the week. If you really look at the numbers, you're not getting 3 gabillion points for the threaded discussions, but what does it also mean? That there aren't 3 gabillion points at stake. Yes, there are points because there's evaluation of the work, but the value to the instructor is being able to informally make sure the student is on track and be able to jump in with an email or a phone call or, in the discussion board itself. Hey, you're, wow, really interesting perspective on this. Let's take another look from, I don't know, something that's a little more spot on, not offensive, correct, if you will. Okay, you see where I'm going. Formal, obviously, midterms, finals, papers, things that show demonstration of mastery, whether it's broad or it's incredibly specific. But the informal in blended and online, these are crucial. This is why part of the thing that so many of us love about wikis, and we may not necessarily grade the work of the wiki, but we include the wikis to be used in your group work so that we can informally assess how you're doing in case we need to jump in. Portfolios, one of our all-time favorite and something that going forward with this class we'll be doing a lot more of. All right, so the portfolio site you'll be going to is through John Muller, who I'm a huge fan of. And there is a ton of information, great resources, lots of links here. For all practical purposes, the portfolios that we are doing going forward are an amalgamation of all 3 of these. We're looking for growth. It's your opportunity to showcase what you really think is your best work, and they are being used as evaluation. Sync versus async are fabulous reference for this. Virginia Commonwealth University, this is a really interesting article. And if you will, when, why, and how to use asynchronous versus synchronous e-learning. I actually refer to this quite a bit. I printed this out and I go back to it quite often. There's also a link to a great EDUCAUSE article. A PDF. We have a great deal of research that shows the value in both synchronous and asynchronous, but for different reasons. Adults in particular, although from my own experience at K-12, I stand by this, tend to indicate that they like these synchronous discussions because they feel that the faculty will be there to offer deeper insights and more knowledge about what's being studied than just what's being shared by their peers in the asynchronous. Yet, the asynchronous discussions have a very, very, very strong place in affective components of learning because they give people that opportunity to slow themselves down, to have interactions with other group members without the quote-unquote eyeball effect, to give people the opportunity to be reflective in what they're saying as opposed to the on-the-spot flexibility and fluidity that we're looking for with the synchronous. Thus, what tends to happen in an asynchronous discussion, threaded discussion if you will, is that students have the opportunity for more guided progression of their growth as opposed to in the synchronous where yes, the instructor will listen, but then it comes down to, okay guys, here's what I'm hearing, blah blah blah, or guys, you're really trying but you're missing the point, blah blah blah. So there's much more directive instruction, or this is what it is, more direct answering, if you will, going on in synchronous versus asynchronous, where there's more time for facilitation and guiding people to come to their own conclusions. All right, but again, both have their place. Now, assessment-wise, well, again, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. There's formal for both of these. There's informal uses for both of these. There's a reason why at Bramman we tend to design in a live presentation in connection with some kind of formal summative assessment, like a signature assignment, like a formal report, like a Prezi, like a this, like a that. Why? The synchronous communication gives us the opportunity to, let's think about week 4. Make sure you are able to discuss what you built in a fluid fashion and answer our questions to ensure academic integrity. But not only that, it gives us a chance to directly ask you questions that maybe are less than clear in the presentation or are so important, and maybe you in particular have been able to craft an understanding in a fashion that is important for the rest of your peers to hear. Having those synchronous discussions adds another level of being able to ensure that you are understanding. Now, conversely, asynchronously, because of the slow time factor, we are looking for a depth. We are looking for you, the student, to engage at a more highly critical level where you're asking questions that maybe in a synchronous discussion we really don't have time to dig into, but we sure do in an asynchronous discussion. So again, through the lens of what kinds of assessments for what kind of learning you would want to design, sync and async definitely have their place. Then we go to formative and summative. Now, for this you will be looking at fairtest.org, the National Center for Fair and Open Testing. Love this organization. Love these guys. Great resource to hold on to. That's definitely one you should bookmark. Summative assessment is the attempt to summarize student learning at some point, right? Versus formative, which we really want to use to gather information to give back to the student as quickly as we can. Even though you do get a grade on your weekly threaded discussions, there's an awful large formative component to them. Again, throughout the week, if you're off track, if you make a comment, this is why you can't just post once. Because we need to see if you are on the right track and we can jump in before the whole of the conversation closes. Live discussions offer great opportunities for formative assessments. Questions that are asked are not to ding you, not to make sure you read the information, but to see if you're on track with being able to use it. Our formal summative assessment for the whole of this program is a major portfolio that you are working on in chunks going forward. You'll work on it in 625. You'll work on it in 628. It will be completed in 629. You will get the chance to pull in what you did in 624 eventually. It's a summative assessment with formative components so that we are able to work with you, your peers are able to work with you throughout the process of building it, so you don't work in the dark and end up turning on the light and finding out you've completely built something you didn't mean to. All right, moving on. After formative and summative, we will look at authentic. And again, we'll go back to my friend John. Love this guy. So for the authentic assessment toolbox, again, great links. Please take your time to go through what all is offered here. Great examples from various teachers of all different grade levels. When we're talking about authentic assessment, we're digging down beyond the immediate confines of our learning environment because we want to get more into the community of practice into which whatever we're doing is authentically performed, practiced. This is very Dewey-esque. Look, we've got Grant Wiggins, backwards design. Engaging in worthy problems or questions of importance in which students must use knowledge to fashion performances effectively and creatively. The tasks are either replicas of or analogous to the kinds of problems faced by the adult citizens and consumers or professional in the real world. You can't get more Dewey-esque than that. So authentic assessment is really crafting opportunities for the students to do something that has meaning and heft to it. It is replicating what is being done, or you have crafted it in a way that is actually what's being done and will be shared with the practitioners, shared with the real life audience. All right? And rubrics. You have to craft a rubric in a fashion that is direct enough so the student knows exactly how many of this is and how many of that's, what needs to be performed to demonstrate mastery and success, but yet has to be broad enough that the student is able to do something that is meaningful and replicable and usable out in the real world. That leads us into collaborative assessments and peer assessments. At this point, peer assessment, self-assessment, well, you're going to be visiting this really lovely page from Highland School's Learning and Teaching Toolkit. There's a lot of really wonderful information on this site. Not so many links, but a great rubric and a couple, you'll notice this actually is British, but it doesn't read with an accent. Ha ha ha. There's only a handful of links here. So this one is not going to take 3,000 hours of your time, but it's very nicely grounded, gives us a good shared language to work with going forward as we look at all the different ways we as 21st century teachers can design assessments, all different kinds of assessments for all different kind of learning and different kind of learners for our students. It's not about the tools themselves. It's about what we do with it. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. All right? Let's get to it. Thanks for your time and attention.